So when we think of Russia, it's quite possible a few images immediately come to mind. Often it's something like the famous nesting dolls, called in Russian matryoshka dolls, with their ever smaller, brightly painted wooden dolls nestled one inside another, until you reach an impossibly small figure. You may have had one as a child. These souvenir items have become so closely aligned with Russia that they are as mutable as an internet theme, or an internet meme, excuse me. There are nesting dolls of Putin and Trump. Slide, please. Nesting dolls of the Beatles and Harry Potter. But would it then surprise you to know that these dolls are not an authentic object of Russian folk culture at all? They were instead invented only 125 years ago, which seems like a lot, but it's actually not a lot when we think of this kind of culture. So they were invented relatively recently, and they were invented explicitly to be sold on the international market as a supposed example of real peasant Russian culture. So in this sense, the Russian nesting doll, although it might look like a modest child's toy, is anything but. It is a sophisticated object created for the express purpose of defining Russian national identity. Slide, please. But maybe you don't think of nesting dolls when you think of Russia. Maybe instead you imagine the name Fabergé, the elite jeweler who supplied the Russian aristocracy with bejeweled objects, and most famously the Fabergé eggs. Each of these eggs were given by the Fabergé company to the Tsar and his family on Easter. They were impossibly well crafted out of the finest metals and precious gems, each centered around a particular theme, and each with a gimmick or a trick inside. And so this one has a miniature clock when you open up the egg. Slide. This one has a tiny model of an imperial palace. Now, these eggs are so rare and they are made of such fine materials that when they've hit the market, which does not happen very often, they have been valued in the millions of dollars. In 2014, one egg was sold for $33 million, and that was 10 years ago. So it would be much higher now with inflation, of course, but also the passage of time. Slide. But how then do we understand Fabergé producing objects like this simple cooking pot just a few years later? Not gold or platinum, but copper. Not bejeweled, but simple. Not for the royal family, but for the soldiers who were fighting in the First World War. Now, each of these objects, slide, tells a story about Russia, about the Russian Empire, about its rise, and about its ultimate fall. And this is what this seminar will be about. How can we tell stories about a specific time and a specific place through objects? How might we approach material culture as a means to understand history, literature, and art? Now, it's important to emphasize that while Russia supplies our main example for this seminar, that is my area of specialization, so that's what I have to offer. And you will certainly learn a little bit about Russia in the 19th century if you take the seminar. That said, I really want to emphasize that this seminar is mostly about learning and teaching with objects of any kind, from any place, and from any time. We are surrounded by objects, by material things. Many of you may have shared the same experience over winter break that I had, which was that I spent almost the entire break, I found, trying to cull the many avalanches of toys from my 3-year-old's room, just in time for a new avalanche to arrive over Christmas. We desire certain objects, we loathe other objects. Many objects we need, but often forget about altogether until they fail us. When was the last time, for example, you really thought about your mixing spoons or your garden hose, how they were made, what materials they were made of, who made them, who designed them? Not very often. We collect things, we collect souvenirs, we collect family mementos. We find ways of saving or displaying those things, and we decide to give others away. So what if we learn to look closely and critically at the material objects of our world and of the worlds of the past? what kinds of stories might we uncover? Slide. Stories about the materials used and where they came from. Stories about the makers and their processes of making. I'm showing you here the beautiful vase made from bright green malachite mined in the Ural Mountains. This one is kept at the Metropolitan Museum in New York, but there are several of them. We'll consider how objects structure our relationships. Are they bought? Are they given as gifts? Are they used or not used? Collected or purged? What do we decide to keep and what to preserve? What gains symbolic meaning of what kind over time? And to do this, we'll read some fundamental texts about studying material culture. We will together build a method and a vocabulary for object study. Slide. We will also, schedules allowing, although I've been told this is possible, so I'm relying on it. We will work with the local collections here at Yale. We will go to the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library, where we'll see, among other things, the amazing, very rare, extremely haunting family albums of the last Romanov family. Slide. We'll go to the Yale University Art Gallery and see some of their Russian Orthodox icons, including this extraordinary example, which was a traveling icon from the 19th century that you would fold into 3 pieces and put in your pocket. We will go to the Peabody Museum, slide, and see their eclectic but rather interesting collection of objects collected from Russia and Eurasia in the 19th and 20th centuries, including this Central Asian gown. And they also, by the way, have a set of Russian nesting dolls. So the seminar then will center Russian objects, but this topic is, and I really again want to emphasize this, necessarily interdisciplinary. These things will lead us to historical texts, to economic and political questions, to works of literature and visual art. Slide. So we'll also read a couple classics of Russian literature. You can't do the Russian 19th century and not do that. We'll read a story about a talented craftsman who makes a shoe for a microscopic steel flea. And we'll read a story about a man with an unusual relationship with his overcoat, appropriate for this cold weather today. We'll also imagine how we or our students might write or make art about objects. How can a more mindful approach to objects be achieved through creative writing or working in other ways with our hands? So, in the final slide, please. So just as a final statement then, I would say once again that this is, yes, a seminar about Russia. We will learn lots of things about 19th century Russia. I'm sure lots of things will come up about contemporary Russia, for better or for worse. But we will also think together about things in general, how we make, acquire, and love things, but also how they make us and the world that we live in.